Well, welcome to our November webinar, Measuring Organizational Resilience. We're going to talk today about the ICOR Organizational Resilience Capability Assessment and how it can be used to measure your organization's level of resilience and to help you plan strategies to increase your capabilities. I am your speaker today, Linda Nelson, the ICOR president, and I serve on the U.S. TAG, and ICOR is a liaison to ISO Technical Committee 292. It's called Security and Resilience, and one of the standards that I helped to develop was ISO 22316 on Organizational Resilience Principles and Attributes, and we are currently working actually as late as Tuesday morning. Instead of going to London from the U.S., we are sitting here in the very early morning hours working on some new work item proposals on really how to implement some of the organizational resilience principles and attributes that we talk about in this first standard. I'm also the author of ICOR's Certified Organizational Resilience series of courses. So welcome. Today we're going to gain an understanding of the capabilities and behaviors, and those are some of the two words that you're going to hear a lot today, are capabilities and behaviors present in more resilient organizations, and how to identify and measure them in order to determine strategy. And that strategy might be considered a capital S strategy with multiple strategies underneath it. And I also want to talk about the term that we're talking here, which is this more resilient organizations. Organizations can be more or less resilient. There is not a resilient state of being. And so I just want to kind of point out some of the reasons why we're using certain wording. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be available on the ICOR webinar page. It might be available as early as tomorrow, but just give us until Friday just to make sure. So if you want to watch it again or you want to share it with someone else, it'll be there for 2 days. In about 2 days, it will stay there for 30 days, and then it will go to our members only resource center. If you have questions, please use the questions button. Questions will be answered either during the webinar or in an email after the webinar. We just have to see how time allots. And also remember that attendees will receive a certificate of attendance if you attend a minimum of 35 minutes. So you get like 1 hour of CEUs or PDUs, whatever term you want to use there. So I want to start with a definition. If you're familiar with ICOR webinars, I personally like to start with defining what it is that we're talking about. And I hope that you've seen this definition before, because when we're talking about organizational resilience, this is what we're talking about. This is the international agreed upon definition on organizational resilience. And in fact, it's actually a modification of this as you take out the word organization and you put in individual or community or whatever you want to put in there, and the definition works. So here we've got the word ability. We're going to be talking about abilities and capabilities and capacity and competence, a lot of C words in addition to the ability word. But we're going to look at the ability of an organization to absorb and adapt. So it's not, we sometimes talk about bouncing back. Well, it's this combination of absorbing and adapting in a changing environment. And I guess if we all know one thing right now is that we are getting kind of tired of a changing environment. It's very exhausting. And I mean, this pandemic is definitely helping us to have a better understanding of resilience in general and the importance of managing change. So the first part of the definition is about absorbing and adapting, to or in a changing environment to enable it to deliver its objectives. And here's where we get to the second part of this definition that I feel is really important. It's about delivering your objectives, what it is that you're trying to do as an organization, and to not just survive, but to actually prosper. And that's why part of what we're talking about with organizational resilience is this idea of innovating and taking advantage of change to actually do better. And so I want to start off with a poll. This is something else I like to do. And I just want to get an understanding of to what extent does your organization understand this definition? Or are they just using resilience in replacement of something else? So Josh is going to go ahead and start the poll. And go ahead and tell us, yes, your organization gets it. They're kind of getting it, but we're more talking about operational resilience. And, then the rest of you are, we're not even talking about it. Or we each have our own definition, might also be something that is considered here. So we'll just give you a few seconds more. All right, Isaiah, if you want to go ahead and close it and share it. It is not surprising that 53% of you are probably looking more at operational resilience. And part of it's the audience here. The people that are attending today are most often involved with managing risk for your organization in some manner. And, I would say that operational resilience is about as close to like enterprise risk management, for example. Those two things very much overlap, but just a little bit different in terms. And one of the things that we're going to be talking about in the new work item proposals on organizational resilience is the relationship between organizational resilience and operational resilience. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about that today. It is really exciting to see almost a third of you actually getting it. This is nice. And then about 15% of you don't have any kind of definition. And that's actually a smaller number than I think when I asked this question a couple of years ago. We had many more people not having any idea what we were talking about, and much fewer people getting it. So thanks, Isaiah. You can go ahead and hide that poll, and let's get into the webinar. So ICOR has put together an organizational resilience capability assessment. And there are some other tools out there that do some of what we're doing. And so we did a pretty decent and thorough job of studying all the different ways to try to measure organizational resilience. And by the way, this is also going to be part of the new work item proposal, is trying to share some information internationally via a standard about how to do some measurement, but not actually telling you how to do it. They give you guidance on the things that you might want to consider. So our capability assessment tool is an interactive tool, and right now it's a spreadsheet, and it will be coming in 2021 as an online app. And we're really excited about that opportunity because then it'll also allow us to report out back to you and give you some data on what organizations are doing and what kinds of strategies they're managing. But it's really meant to be used by organizations to measure to what extent they demonstrate the capabilities and behaviors present in more resilient organizations. So here you're seeing the word capabilities and behaviors again. The outcome of the assessment is supposed to be a measure of your organization's strengths and weaknesses, and then you're supposed to use that to increase the resilience of your organization by providing really specific strategies, capabilities, and behaviors for improvement. And so here is where understanding your strengths and weaknesses as they relate to resilience and looking at where some of your strategies might be strong and some of the strategies might be weaker across your organization can help you to put together ideas and other strategies for how you can improve. Each strategy and capability within the tool is documented as an outcome statement. So, and you can use that statement as a reference against which to score your organization's alignment. And so this is why it's also really important. This outcome statement, and we'll share with you some of those, will help you to actually do then like a report on where your strengths are and where your weaknesses lie. So we use some references, and a lot of these references are produced by ICOR, as we've been doing this research since 2005. But one of the documents, of course, as I mentioned, is the ISO standard 22316. We used our organizational resilience model, and I'm going to talk about each one of these briefly in a minute. Our organizational resilience framework, which was the first thing that we developed. We've recently published the competency model for leadership and our resilience framework as well. So this standard, ISO 22316, was published in 2017, and it was the first standard that was ever published about organizational resilience. And this took us years to develop. In fact, there were many versions thrown out because it took us a really, really long time to come to an agreement internationally about how we were defining organizational resilience. And while we meant the standard to go further, really what we were able to do was define it and identify principles and attributes demonstrated by more resilient organizations. And this is why the work needs to continue. Normally, you don't write an international standard until that body of knowledge is pretty much accepted worldwide, and now you're just documenting it in a standardized fashion. Whereas this standard really was about figuring out what it is we were talking about so that we could have conversations. And that's why that definition is so important. As a result of that standard, ICOR put together an organizational resilience model. So we looked at what the standard was talking about, and we tried to group some of that content into what we're calling 3 dimensions. So we have leadership and strategy, culture and behaviors, and preparedness and managing risk. So you can see here that preparedness and managing risk is about 1/3. It is not all of it. So when you're looking at that enterprise risk management, or you're looking at operational resilience, that's really the burgundy area, that preparedness and managing risk. Then we looked at, there's 9 attributes that were identified in the standard, and we looked at those and we put those under the categories. So we've got shared vision, understanding context, and having effective leaders under leadership and strategy. We've got a healthy culture, sharing information and continual improvement under culture and behaviors, and under preparedness and managing risk, we have having available resources, essentially managing risk in some manner, and also managing change. And I bet that, I just throwing that out here, that, before March, you wouldn't have maybe considered managing change to be such a key part of managing risk. And I hope that as you have struggled and succeeded in these times under pandemic times, that you have understood the importance of managing change. And then we looked at behaviors. So these were the behaviors, or the adverbs that were used within the standard, and we just put them here in alphabetical order. And so we identified those 16 behaviors that were part of that work. Back in 2005, we put together an organizational resilience framework, and we were really looking at that time with 10 disciplines. And in 2016, we moved to 12 disciplines. And part of that, actually, I think it was either 2012 or 2016. I can't remember which year. But anyways, we went from really a focus on operational risk management or operational resilience, with looking at the different ways that you can manage risk, to more of an organizational resilience model approach. But we still teach within those 12 disciplines, and these disciplines, as well as some others, are part of the assessment as well. In 2019, we published our competency model, and we believe strongly that if you're going to have an organizational resilience strategy, and your organization is looking to improve how it, not just improve how it operates, but reduce risk and do other things to make it a better place to work, that we needed to have leaders that understood the process. And so this is part of our competency side of it for different leaders. And lastly, we also published in 2010 our community resilience framework, and then it was modified in 2016 based on some of the latest research, just a little bit. And we're going to talk about why community resilience matters. And I think you can pretty much understand today, better than you maybe understood a year ago, the impact of the resilience of the community on the organization. So here we're looking at 5 aspects: the environment itself, the governance of that community. And if you're in the United States, and really if you're in any place, but in the United States, I think it's the most complicated governance-wise, because we have leaders at all different levels. And just like you have, different leaders within an organization, the leadership at all different levels, you might be ruled by a mayor or a council person, a governor of the state, and though they all have autonomy to pretty much rule as they would like. And so this idea of responsible governance is important. Also, a strong economy. You can see that most countries right now are struggling with the economy due to the pandemic. We also need to be prepared. We're looking at how are we going to be distributing a vaccine, for example. How do you even get tested? And every community is different. And every community in the world is struggling with this and how to do that. And then, of course, I left quality of life to last because obviously affordable housing and quality health care is vitally important. Access to employment, having social existence and freedoms, and access to education are all part of that as well. So really, you can see the impact during a pandemic on how your organization is able to function within the community within which it resides. And so this also has a place in the assessment tool. So I want to start with a little more level setting, talk about some of the terms, actually to define and share some of the terms that we're going to be talking about. A lot of times the term ability and capability are used interchangeably, and I want to start with kind of clearing that up. So an ability is usually tied to a person. And so the capability of an organization is tied to the ability of the people that work for it. And here's where it's tied to an attribute. So it becomes attributes is one of the things that the standard measures, and it's one of the things that we're going to be talking about capabilities within the tool. And they're all tied to attributes. So these things are either present or not. You have certain people with certain abilities, and they're at your disposal to perform skills or to perform tasks for your organization. And it's really important for your organization to have an understanding of the abilities of the people that work within it so that you don't over-assess what you think your abilities are, and then you will be unable to deliver. So moving to capabilities. A capability is what they define it as. It's a combination of that capacity, the materials you have on place, and then that expertise that you need to perform. And expertise is going to be tied to that ability. And it's usually a collaborative process, and it also can refer to an ability that exists within an individual but can be improved upon. So we can see somebody becoming more capable as they have grown some of their abilities. Within a business setting, a business capability, you need those things. It's that expertise to perform your core functions. And you might be able to define business capabilities, but actually be unable to deploy it because you don't have the right capacity. And because capability is tied to the capacity to deliver. And this capacity to deliver means you might be able to do it, but you don't have the resources. And so we're going to be talking about resources as well. And I can just give an example of one of my kids works as a food safety person for a manufacturing plant where they are manufacturing ingredients that are necessary for a lot of the fast food restaurants. And it's very, very difficult to manage COVID in a manufacturing environment, and where it's supposed to be running 24/7. And so when they've had impact to COVID, that means that there's people not available to work, and therefore their capacity to deliver the manufacturing of the ingredients becomes compromised. So they have the capability and they have the ability, but they don't have the capacity. So these three things really need to be considered when you're doing your assessment. So understanding how they relate to each other and not just looking at capability, but looking at your capacity to do so. So you need to look at things like how much is needed, when do we need it, and this capacity to deliver your goods and services becomes almost more important than your capability in sometimes. And so looking at your capacity issues and having a very clear understanding of how those capacity capabilities might actually change under certain business conditions or under certain disasters or crises, whatever words that you want to use with that. And then we get to competence. In order to deliver your strategy, you need to have competencies in place, and all this comes from the combination of your abilities, your capabilities, and your capacity. And understanding what the competence is going to help you to determine not only which strategies you want to implement, but also the delivery of those as well. So you need to be realistic about your competence and all of the pieces that go into that. So hopefully you'll remember these things so that this will help you with a little bit of an understanding of what went on behind the scenes as we looked at different capabilities.
Hey, Linda, just to interject for a moment,
Yeah.
we have a question from Joanna in reference to slide 12, asking if you could speak a bit more about the roles and executive leaders that you would see involved in each area.
All right, I'm going to be brief with this because it's a whole topic in itself, and we actually did a webinar on the competency model. But what you're going to see is that when we look at the categories, or what we're saying our dimensions, and how we are doing the self-assessment, how we've grouped things into common areas, you're going to see this played out. So we're going to, how your organization behaves, how it's structured, how you manage risk, how you manage your technology, and how you manage continual improvement are all going to be part of this model. And so we did that intentionally because you need to have leaders who understand each one of those things, and not necessarily experts in those, but that understand how it's supposed to work so that they can have the right people in place when they're trying to build that strategy. This would be something, feel free to contact me after the webinar and I can go into some more detail about this as well. I've done a couple of presentations on this both at the DRJ conference and at the Continuity conference as well. So, and check out the website, there's more information there too. But this is a whole huge topic all in itself. And this is the content area for our Certified Organizational Resilience series. There's 25 what we call mini courses or competency courses that are tied to that. So let me just flip back to how you're going to score. So there's 17 strategies altogether. And each of those then we've tied to, usually 5 capabilities. So evidence that you would see that you're actually doing these strategies. And each of those is listed, as I mentioned earlier, as an outcome statement. So this is what it looks like when it's done well. And then you're going to score how well you meet that on a 5-level metric, capability metric. And so this is, I like simple. So I like having a 3-level, kind of a maturity model or capability metric. A lot of people like the 7-level, and in my mind, I'm like, how do you differentiate over 7? So we compromised to have 5 levels. So you go from that initial or ad hoc where everything's pretty much unpredictable and reactive, where you're doing things and your organization might be doing really good things, but it's very reactive, to something that has moved to where it's being done in some parts of your organization and it's being managed in some part of your organization, but it's much more project-based and still a little bit intuitive. The mid-level is where you've defined it and you're actually being proactive. So you might have some plans in place, some ways that you're doing things. So it's it's moved from a reactive level to a proactive level. And then level 4 is where I feel like you're becoming competent, or capable, and where you're not. The word quantitatively managed is important because it means you're measuring. So you're not just putting things into place, but you're actually measuring and figuring out how they work. And then finally, at the very top is when it just becomes part of what you're doing. And notice that the adverbs here, the verbs here, are stable, flexible, efficient. You're going to see some of those same words used when we talk about behaviors, because it becomes how your organization behaves, and that's why culture becomes a very important part of this. So the actual assessment itself has a scorecard where everything rolls up, and you can see like the little green check marks means you're doing well. The exclamation points in yellow or gold are things that you need to take a look at. And so I'll be talking in more detail on each of these, but we have essentially those 5 dimensions, and I'm going to talk about each one of those. And then as part of those dimensions, we have 17 strategies along with 10 sub-strategies. Overall, then, we have 95 capabilities, and we have 6 categories of behaviors. We would have really liked all these numbers to look really pretty. Like 17, in my mind, is not a pretty picture. It'd be nice to have 100 capabilities, but we didn't want to take something out or add something just for the numbers to look good. So we really looked very carefully at what needed to be in place. And of course, all things become revised after they become used. And we have more people using the tools so that we can do some assessment as well. But for now, these are the areas that we have in place. So what you'll see in the gray bars are totals by dimension. So in this one that we did, you've got Dimension 1, Leadership and Strategy, has a capability metric of 2.8, and that's kind of in the middle. It's in the 50 to 74%. And then on the very right-hand side, you've got your behavior metric of 2. And then at the bottom, you get your total scores. So in the gray, you have the scores by dimension, and at the very bottom in the black row, you've got your totals overall. So while the capability metric for leadership and strategy was 2.8, because there were some 3s in some of the other dimensions, the overall score moved up to 2.9 for the whole organization in all the dimensions. And ironically, the behavior scores look very similar. So it went from 2.0 for just the leadership to 2.04 under the total behaviors. So you'll have 2 ways of reporting. One of the ways is to look by dimension, and the second way is to look at total overall. So I want to talk a little bit about what we mean by these dimensions. And leadership and strategy is somewhat obvious, but we understand that organizational resilience is enhanced when the organization intentionally implements strategies to increase its resilience. I mean, it has to be intentional, and this changes how the organization operates. And the behavior of its leadership is a key contributor to how the organization implements these strategies, and it's all rooted in its understanding of itself and its relationship to others, and you'll see that in a few minutes. We all know the importance of culture and how your organization behaves. So we also see resilience increase when there's an intentional effort to ensure a healthy culture throughout the organization. And a healthy culture is one that's supportive of organizational resilience, as well as demonstrates a commitment to and existence of shared beliefs and values, positive attitudes, and how people behave. When we look at organizational infrastructure, I think this was probably the most eye-opening piece for me personally, was understanding how organizations are structured makes a huge difference on how well they're able to manage change and how well they're able to make decisions and be agile and adaptive. I want you to think about those. We're going to talk about the behaviors, but this idea of agile we're going to be talking about as well. And if you've done past webinars with us, you've seen that agile is a topic that we bring to the forefront. So this idea of organizational infrastructure is it's the ability to manage the physical structures required for the organization to function and prosper. And this includes how the organization manages its people as well as its finances. I think most of you are pretty comfortable with the preparedness and managing risk, because your organization should intentionally manage risk and prepare for the unexpected. And then looking at the alignment and collaboration of all the ways that you manage risk is really fundamental to enhancing organizational resilience. And of course, we want continuous or continual improvement as well as innovation. So when your organization encourages and creates a culture of continual improvement and innovation across all of its personnel, and then commits to validate and continually improve its organizational resilience and capabilities, this is where really everything hits the road and things that you've put in place either work or don't. So let's take a little bit of a...
Another question from Darlene asking how one would develop a resilience assessment or scorecard and whether or not there's a standard.
So this scorecard that I've just shared, that's pretty much the purpose of this webinar, is to share with you the scorecard and the assessment tool that we have created. I believe we're the only organization in the world right now that has a scorecard that looks like this. There are some that are looking at pieces of it, but not any of them that are looking at all of the things that we're looking at. And so I hope that by listening to this and learning more about how to do an assessment, that'll help to answer your question. When we're looking at leadership and strategy, one of the things that we talked about was the organization understanding who they are and its relationship to others. So you need to have a shared vision and purpose. It needs to be clearly articulated, and in some companies you'll see it like written on the walls as you walk in, that everybody really understands why they're there, what is our vision, what are our values, and all of that helps to provide clarity in decision making at all levels of the organization, because everybody understands where they fit in to the organization. And that then ties to an understanding of context and relationships. So they need to understand internally who they are, as well as externally, how they interact with others, who are your customers, who are your suppliers, who are all of those people that you interact with, who are you trying to sell to, who cares about what it is that you're doing. And that helps you to make, again, more effective strategic decisions about the priorities for implementing your resilience strategy. And of course, we all understand the importance of leadership, not just leading, but also helping people to manage. And this is really tied to having leaders that promote trust and unity and providing that shared understanding of the organization's purpose, that we're all in this together, we're all moving in the same direction, and that we have leaders who develop and encourage others to lead. And looking at this idea that we have people who can lead under a different range of conditions and circumstances, and this includes during periods of uncertainty or disruptions. So not just during normal times, but during all times. When we're looking at culture, we're looking at commitment. And this is a commitment to organizational resilience, not just using the word, but actually intentionally demonstrate a commitment to and this existence of those shared beliefs and values and what it is that you're trying to do. And this is tied to shared information and knowledge. Earlier this year, we did a webinar on knowledge management. And this was one of the eye-opening things that I had when we were doing this research as well, was the importance of knowledge sharing and the impact of knowledge and information sharing, how it's been impacted by the pandemic. As many of us are working remotely, we're not having those individual chats. We're not just doing those brainstorming. Yes, everything's scheduled. We're having Zoom meetings. But I'm really talking about kind of the more casual sharing of information where somebody just asks a question and all of a sudden you've got an idea and it's rolling, instead of waiting to schedule something to talk about it formally. And this becomes really important, that your organization has a structure in place to share information and knowledge so that learning is shared, and that you're actually focusing on how to share learning with each other, and learning from each other is encouraged. This is also the place where we first talk about Agile. And we've done, like I've said, some other webinars where we've talked about the importance of Agile project management and how it changes how your organization operates. And if you can take the learnings from Agile project management from the IT or software side and start implementing it in all the projects you manage, you're going to see a change in how agile and adaptive your organization is and how well it operates under changing conditions, which is going back to the definition of organizational resilience, or more resilient organizations. I want to talk about structure and design a little bit. I mentioned earlier that this was pretty much the main learnings that I had from this, was the impact of how your organization is structured and designed. And so when an organization that's structured and designed for both high performance and managing change is what we're looking for as an outcome. So some of the strategies that you might have in place there is that your organization relies upon good governance and management and has an understanding of how structure and design impacts organizational resilience. Another strategy is that your structure and design allows for its people to work effectively in cross-functional teams. So notice these are outcome statements. This is what we're expecting to see. This would be a high score if you're doing this all the time across the organization. That your structure and design allows for its people to collaborate and communicate both vertically and horizontally throughout the organization. And working remotely when you're not used to and under different conditions has changed how people collaborate and communicate. And so hopefully we can take that learning and look and see, when this is over, how we can take what we've learned from this as a learning organization and do some improvements when we kind of go back to operating as normal. And then this is one I really like. The organization structure and design allows those responsible for responding and managing an incident to switch from one design to another if needed in order to work in a more agile and flexible manner. And this is where you look at, okay, you have a certain incident command structure, for example, that you use, or a crisis management structure, whatever you call it, for managing an incident. How easily does your organization's structure work when you're changing from one way of operating to another? And then looking at that structure and seeing that it's designed to have as short of chains of commands as possible. So this idea of being more as decentralized as possible, where you've got shorter chains of command and you've got more delegation and more empowerment, and trying to operate as flat as possible. And this will be dependent upon, what industry you're in, what it is that you do as well. So it's not an easy answer here, but looking at always trying to be as flat as you can. This is the one I think that'll actually also have a huge impact, looking at the workplace itself. And we've gone from being very traditional to being cubicle to being open to now having some kind of agile workplaces where we have different ways of meeting. And now we have empty workplaces. So I think this will be really interesting to see where this is. And what we're trying to do is have a workplace that's flexible and productive. So what works? I was talking to one of my other kids recently, and she was saying that one of her associates is actually way more productive working from home than at work. And so, where do you do your best work? And having organizations kind of rethink this to see how can we be as agile as possible in our workplace, and what does that look like? The facility management piece is actually a very big piece. So here is where you integrate your people, your places, your process, and all your technology within that built environment. And here is where you also do a lot of risk management, where you've got your, emergency management type things, your life safety things, your environmental controls. All of those things are all tied under facility management. We're looking at who's hiring. So HR has a very, very important role under all conditions. But when they understand the type of capabilities and abilities and behaviors that you're looking for your different jobs, that really helps them to hire the right people. And HR has become a really, really important part of managing through this pandemic. And looking at how finance needs to become more agile and be more forward-looking. Now that we have digital data available, that we can be much more forward-thinking than just reporting on where we've been, your third quarter report. This is something that all organizations need to be embracing.
Hey, Linda, one more quick question.
Yeah.
We have an inquiry asking if these different strategies are weighted differently, like, for example, if structure and design would perhaps have more weight than some of the others in terms of importance.
Yeah, they are not weighted differently. They all have the same weight. Your organization might think one is more important to another, but what we're seeing is that these attributes and capabilities are really, I don't want to say pick and choose, but they're equal. And they might have more, you might put a strategy in place to change something that has a huge impact to your organization because you haven't been doing it. Whereas another organization might be doing it in some manner, so that isn't going to have as big of an impact. So they really aren't weighted at all. So with that, Isaiah, if you could, just looking at those first three dimensions, which one do you feel you would have the highest score right now? And notice I'm asking you this before we get to preparedness and managing risk, because I knew that you would all pick that one first. We're just going to give this about 30 seconds. Well, it looks like you guys are, it's like almost an even run. The whatever animal you're watching running is, they're neck and neck. All right, go ahead. Thank you. It's really interesting that organizational infrastructure is getting the highest. And that's probably true because your organization has to function, and every organization has those areas where they need to function. So that makes a lot of sense. It also, if you'll notice, the other dimensions all had, the first two dimensions had 3 strategies, and organizational infrastructure had 5. So in the end, you're going to, those scores, when you talk about the weighting, they actually, each of those individual 5 get weighted a little bit less than the individual 3 in those other dimensions. So thank you for sharing that. Those are pretty darn close to what we're seeing. So you good job on that one. So when we're moving to preparedness and managing risk, one of the things you might find interesting to see that having available resources is number one. we often say, well, we would be able to do that if we had this, or if we had time, or if we had this. And that big if becomes having available resources and having those to be adequate. And almost every management system standard that you see is tied to the predicate of having available resources. So that's number one. Do you have the resources, and are they adequate? The second one is managing change. So we looked at the definition of organizational resilience is the ability to manage under a changing environment. And so one of the things that's been really interesting is how Agile has moved into the change management world. And, looking at combining that lean and decision-making and some of those other things into one system. And so look at how your organization manages change. And then thirdly, how does your organization manage risk? And here is where I'm going to make some of you very happy. So we're going to just dig down into this strategy, which, and this, or I should call a capability that you manage risk, and that the organization anticipates and responds to threats and opportunities arising from sudden or gradual changes in its internal and external context. And as part of that, we have 5 strategies. So your organization identifies and implements risk-based management disciplines that contribute to your organization's resilience. It manages the effect of risk on its objectives across its risk-based management disciplines. We're really looking at this as a system, and that you ensure that the risk-based management systems are sufficiently robust and effective to respond to changes, that your organization empowers people to identify and communicate threats and opportunities and to take action that will benefit the organization, and that in sum, the organization effectively manages risk. And now we're going to give you 10 examples of what that might look like. So we have what we call sub-strategies. And each of these is something that you probably will find familiar. So you have an incident response structure. You've got a crisis management communication structure. You have the capability to manage your business continuity aspects. You've looked and you've got strategies to manage supply chain risk, continuity, and security. And your data centers and other critical environments are able to operate under all those conditions. In addition, you've got your information and communication technology systems in place. You're managing your storage and availability. You're managing your information and cybersecurity. And then you've got, we picked 2, asset management and quality management, to put here. The other ones that would be considered different ways of managing risk are mostly included under facility management. Things like I mentioned earlier, environmental health and safety, your energy, some of those types of systems, your physical security, for example, and your life safety types of things. So these are what we're calling sub-strategies, and your organization might decide they're going to do everything under IT, and that's where they're focusing because they're an IT company, and that's where they're going to focus for how they're going to manage risk. Other organizations, it's much more about reputation. They're going to look at crisis management types of things. And so here is where each of these has a single score. We don't have any subsets for these, but these are examples of different strategies. And the other reason I really wanted to focus it this way is you get 1 score. So you total those 10 sub-strategies to get 1 score. A lot of times, and I think there is actually at least one question that we're going to get to at the end that talks about, where does business continuity fit into this? And I don't want to minimize the importance of business continuity because I understand there's a lot of business continuity people here. However, we're seeing this as one way to manage risk. And notice that managing risk is just one of the capabilities. And so it is important, but it's not the entire system. And so by looking at organizational resilience, we're looking at it in a very broad piece and looking at these are different strategies to increase your resilience, but they're not the only way to do it. So here's you've got the next poll, and I intentionally put this here. So the limitation of the webinar system is that we can only have 5 choices, and so there were 10 strategies there, so I had to put them into groups. So if you could choose one of the groups where you think your organization should focus on for future improvement. And sometimes people really miss the importance of asset management, for example, understanding your assets. And I can tell you, if you're in a manufacturing plant or anything, quality management is one of the very top things that is the driver for managing risk in the organization. And one of the things that each one of those is a management system in itself, and management systems are meant to manage risk across the organization and to be a strategy for doing so. And that's why it's picked there. So while I'm seeing that quality management has the lowest score right now, I believe if you worked in maybe a less office type environment, you would see quality management being a big driver for a lot of organizations. So go ahead. Our results, we really are pretty evenly between incident response and crisis management. I would bet that you're probably seeing some ways that your organization can improve. Because of the current crisis, what you're seeing are some of the weaknesses, and that's really important that we take away the learnings from this. And I think that business continuity had a role to play at the beginning, and maybe it doesn't have as much of a role to play right now, but the technology systems certainly play a role as people, are trying to work remotely and all of that. And I'm seeing the lower scores both for the quality and asset management because I think that most organizations are doing that. Or if they're not, you might not be aware of it just because you're working in more of the risk piece. So thank you, Isaiah.
Absolutely. We have a question in regard to this poll asking if you would expect climate change risk to be included in the asset management category.
Geez, that's a good question. I would, and I'm just talking off the top of my head here without having the time to give it really good consideration. But I almost think that it's part of the facility management because climate change, you're trying to manage your impact to the environment with your buildings and what it is that you're doing. So that goes back to kind of that environmental health and safety piece, your energy usage, how you manage your waste, all of those things. I think it actually probably pertains more to that, and that's why these things aren't listed, because we're addressing those aspects under the facility management. We didn't want to double count it and double score it. So it's because it's part of that piece. We didn't list it here. So I hope that answers your question as best as I could in a short piece. Just to finish up with the fifth dimension, this is where we're looking at risk-based management discipline integration. So we've got all these people in your organization managing risk. We need to be managing risk like the idea of enterprise risk management or operational resilience, looking at how we can manage risk across the organization and trying to unsilo things as much as we can. And then looking at the overall governance and accountability as it relates to continuous improvement and innovation. And finally, like I mentioned earlier, understanding the importance of the community where your organizations reside. And how, especially if you're a global organization, you've got lots of different communities to consider and the risks to those different communities. And actually also the benefits of different communities, like why you would, so not just looking at the downside, but choosing where you have your locations and where you're going to operate based on the overall resilience of those communities. Usually it's done for purely financial reasons, where you get the best deal. So I want to finish up by looking at behaviors. And these behaviors are really, really important. So remember we started off in the organizational resilience model with 16 behaviors. We could not possibly manage 16 measurements. And so we looked at then the definitions for each of those behaviors and looked at which ones were common so we could get rid of some because they overlapped, and then which ones we could connect with each other. So we put adaptive and flexibility, and that's really agile. So we didn't use the word agile here, but we used adaptive and flexible. When you have ever increasing uncertainty and change, you need to have the ability to change, evolve, and adapt in response to those changing circumstances, and the ability to apply existing resources to new purposes. Hopefully all of this is going like ding, 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 because we have so many examples today of what that looks like. And then looking at how you can continually evolve and change and modify things versus going back to, well, we don't do it that way, so we're not going to do it that way now, which is really the opposite of being adaptive and flexible. We also need your organization to be resourceful, creative, and innovative. So we get back to behaviors are really about behaviors of the people that work for your organization, and they're being led by leaders. So here we're getting to what kinds of behaviors do we want from our leaders, and then how does that trickle down so that everybody behaves this way. So we want to have people that rapidly find different ways to achieve your goals or to meet your needs, and again, under those changing circumstances, and how can you kind of transcend those traditional ideas and roles and patterns to create something new by using originality of thought and demonstrating imagination. And there are some organizations where you are not allowed to be creative. We just do what we tell you. And that really, those behaviors are going to impact the culture, and it's going to impact your organization's resilience. So you need to have an organization that fosters creativity by seeking out and promoting new and innovative ideas. And this becomes a really important piece of organizational resilience. I'm sure over the last year, no matter where you are in the world, you've been looking at this idea of, being inclusive and collaborative, as well as, looking at diversity types of things. So we're going to look at how your organization seeks collaboration and engagement of all the people working together for that common purpose or goal, and how you look at inclusion of your different people in the collaboration results so that you have that sense of shared ownership, as well as that joint vision to build resilience. So that ties back to that dimension one where we talked about this shared vision and purpose. And you can't get that if you're not inclusive and collaborative. I'm sure you'll like this one. You want to be prepared, robust, and redundant. So making sure that you have plans in place so they can be used when they're needed. Make sure that your systems are robust enough, that they're well conceived, constructed, and managed so that they can withstand significant impacts. And then looking at the idea of redundant, that spare capacity piece, so that what you have in place, that goes back to having available resources and assets, so that when you have a big disruption, extreme pressure, or surges in demand, that you're able to manage that. This is one I really like, this idea of being aware and reflective. Does your organization actually spend time or give you time to think about who you are and how you're doing, and use that information to help really anticipate future conditions? So here is where we're looking at situational awareness, horizon scanning, how you gather and share information, and then how you allow your people to learn from past experience. So this is where we're getting to that knowledge and information management and learning. And that's why it's really, these behaviors are tied to each of those dimensions. And so being able to learn from past experience and then helping to use that information to inform that future decision making. So this awareness and reflective piece, in my mind, is really pivotal, and it helps to impact both your current activities and then looking at your future strategies. And finally, we have the diverse and integrated. You need to understand the importance of a diverse nature and characteristics of its people. And I want you to even think basically just diversity of thought. If your people are all of the same age or the same ethnicity, or they all have really similar backgrounds, it's going to be very hard for you to think differently. And so think about your meetings, and do you have people that don't agree? And maybe they don't agree because they see things differently than you do. And so it's really, really important that when you're having these conversations and having these discussions about how to move forward, that not only does your organization allow you to have opinions that that might not be whatever the leader is saying, but also that you're understanding the importance of this diversity of thought, and that you can use those thoughts to help you in being more creative in your solutions and your actions. So in our behavior metrics, I1, and meaning that we have 3 levels. So you're essentially saying, no, I don't see that behavior in evidence. We sometimes see it, or this is really how we operate. So those are the 3 levels for how to measure behavior. So the capabilities we measure in 5 levels, and the behaviors we measure in 3 levels. So here's where you get to do one that is choose all that apply. When you're looking at behaviors that are in evidence a more resilient organization, choose those behaviors that you feel are embedded into your organization. And this is going to, like I mentioned earlier, going to be very much tied to your culture. And I did have to combine inclusive and collaborative with diverse and integrated, just because we only had 5 choices.
While we're waiting here, we had an inquiry about how you would counter inherent biases and subjectivity, just given the background that a lot of resilience professionals and business leaders would have a tendency to rate their programs and organizations more favorably than what exists in reality.
Yeah, that's why you need more than one person conducting this assessment. And then you having this, that's a really important question, because, and going back to this ability, capability, and capacity. So when you're looking at these things, yeah, we can say that we can do it, but do we have the capacity to actually do it? Wow, these scores are really interesting. Now, I would have thought, so here's where your bias, I'll just bring that up since that question was there, might actually be impacting your scoring here. So here we've got people that are more into managing risk in this, and so you guys gave the lowest score of being prepared, robust, and redundant because you understand the weaknesses of your current system. Somebody else doing this, maybe someone in leadership that's, in HR or in finance, or, maybe your CIO or something, is going to probably score that much higher because, of course, we're prepared, but they don't understand your weaknesses. So this is really, really interesting. One of the, you see that all the time, is the more knowledge that you have, the more critical you are of something too. And it's not surprising that aware and reflective gets the least. We never have time to reflect on anything. It seems like we're always rushing. So I'm taking a close look at the time here. We only have a couple of minutes left, but I wanted to, so here's the balance that we have. It's kind of a challenge, is sharing with you what the tool kind of looks like without giving away all of our intellectual IP. So I just wanted to show you kind of how it looks. And this will look very similar once we get it into our application. So we have a definition of our dimension, and then we will share a strategy. We number the strategy, we define the strategy, and then, or the capability or attribute, and then we give you 5 ways that that's what it would look like. And then you score it anywhere between 1 and 5, and then you do the same thing with your behaviors. So within each strategy, you're going to actually be evaluating the behaviors. And so you're not evaluating the behavior of each of those strategies. You're really evaluating the behavior of your capabilities. So your shared vision and unity of purpose. And do you see that as being something that's adaptive and flexible? So here, this sample one, they got a score of 3.8 out of 5 for their capability, and they got a score of 2.33 out of 3 for their behaviors. And then moving on to strategy 2, understanding your context, I keep saying the wrong thing, looking at your capability of understanding of context and relationships. You've got the 5 strategies there. And again, you can score those both by your capabilities as well as your behavior scores. And then lastly, what you'll see is when you finish a dimension and that score, what you get then is a score for that dimension. So you have a score for each of those strategies, and you have scores for the capabilities and the strategies that you're measuring. And then you have a capability score as well as a behavior score, and then those get modified. Those scores then get tied together. So that's kind of how that looks. And I just want to remind you that there is no single strategy or solution. So we can't say, just do this one thing and it'll work. What you need to do is you have to manage change. You have to build diversity. You have to manage your risk. You need to break down those silos between your organization, even within how you manage risk, and you need to adapt. And it all needs to be a coordinated approach. Otherwise, you're not able to innovate at all. So make the assessment part of your toolkit. It's not very expensive. We have really priced it low so that people can afford it. So it's less than $1,200. And the cost for the online app will be the same. So if you purchase the spreadsheet, then you automatically will get put into the app once it's available. I wanted to answer a couple of questions that came in ahead of time. This one came from Saudi Arabia, and the question was kind of a statement and a question. But we know that resilience is an accumulative trait or ability, and I'll even say capability of an organization. So what methodology can be used to link it to the risk spectrum? And that's one of the reasons why I shared with you kind of those sub-strategies for managing risk, is you need to start looking at how you can unsilo your risk management and how you manage risk and how you can do it in a much more coordinated manner. And some of the focus on that is really integrating your management systems or your systems for how you manage risk. So that's really, in my mind, the top of the mind, and that's where you become more operationally resilient. So that's one strategy, is we're going to really focus on how we manage risk, integrating all of those areas, and then seeing how that impacts our risk spectrum itself. This other question came from the United States from a business continuity person. And so what are the 3 to 5 top things business continuity programs need to consider as you move kind of from business continuity management to organizational resilience? Is it building cross-company relationships, establishing a broader initiative like enterprise risk management, or just a matter of changing their title? Please don't just change your title. But I would say, number one, looking at how has your business continuity program integrated with managing this crisis of a pandemic? Is it working well? Is it not? And kind of the same thing I said with the Saudi Arabia person is, how can you work with the other people in your organization who are responsible for managing risk so that you can, 1 plus 1 becomes way more than 2 when you're looking at managing risk. You get a lot more outcome and benefit from working together with other aspects of your organization. And some organizations do a lot of these things under the umbrella of business continuity, and other organizations, business continuity is a very small part of how they manage risk. So part of that is, what's kind of the scope of your business continuity management system? Is it a system or is it still a program, and how do you do that? So I would at least get your business continuity program to be part of enterprise risk management if it isn't already, and then start building those cross-company relationships. So the answer to this is yes, but not just change your title. Please go farther than that. We are out of time. We answered some of the questions as we went. So please put your questions in the survey too when it comes out. So either post them here and we will reply to those with the answers when you get your certificates of attendance. Thank you so much for attending today. We have one more webinar. We just added it for a month from now, coming from our Columbia partners, and they're going to be putting on a webinar on cybersecurity resilience, and there'll be more information coming out about that shortly. All of these webinars are part of our Resilience Research Center. So like I said, this will be available for the next 30 days, and then it will be part of our Resilience Research Center. Contact us to learn more. We'd love you to join our network, read our blogs, and of course, purchase this tool. So thank you very much. We hope you enjoyed it, and please complete the evaluation because we really do pay attention to that. Have a good rest of the day. Bye.